So what is up, everybody? Today I'm joined by my good friend, entrepreneur, Jess of Carats Cake, and super excited to have you on because you and I feel have had some really great entrepreneurial / business conversations. And I always love when somebody comes into the wedding industry, which by and large, a lot of the time can be small business owners, and they bring a much broader sense of business and worldliness to the industry, and they look at things inside out for what they really are. And you and I will talk about, hey, a business is something that actually produces profit, not something that loses money a year. You know, and we've had so many of those conversations. So first, I just want to welcome you on, and I want to thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
And obviously, I think anyone who's watching this knows who you are and knows the company you have, which is Carats Cake, which you've really defined yourself in the marketplace. And there are obviously some big players with massive amounts of capital. So you took on, in a lot of ways, the knot in the wedding wire, who have billions behind them, and you were able to carve a space for yourself. So I want to applaud you for that, because I'm sure there was probably a little insanity as that all went down as to, can this happen, and all that goes into that. But you did it. And I think that needs to be applauded and commended in and of itself. So if you could tell everybody a little bit about who you are and how we are sitting here today and how Carats Cake became what it is.
Well, we're one of our earliest supporters. I think that's the thing, that when you are going to go into an industry and not necessarily have the same amount of resources, capital definitely is an essential resource. When you are building something, you have to really figure out how you can invest in resources that will take you farther than just, $1 equals $1 spend. That's something that we've always thought about in building Carats Cake. And part of that comes down to building a brand. And so that was something for us that we really invested heavily in at first, was building a brand that we thought really spoke to, first and foremost, the business owners. That's how you and I became friends. A big initial part of Carats Cake was really building out relationships with key business owners inside key markets that we wanted to collaborate with. And I don't use that word lightly. I use collaborate. Really, it's funny because sometimes we get pushback from time to time. Some businesses will say, collaborate is really working together. And as much as, yes, we have a service, and yes, we do charge something into the industry for what we offer, we feel that it is a much more sort of holistic process. And look at us, 6 years down the line, here we are hanging out together. And I think our relationship started with me probably knocking on the door and calling you not once or twice, maybe 10 times. And you finally saying, okay, I'll sit down. And, and that's just how it works. But I'm just saying, that's how it works. So you have to be, you persevere. You keep, there's so many people that, we really wanted to talk with and connect with and really, understand what you were building inside this industry, share, our vision, and have that inform, where we went. And, that's what we did with Carats Cake.
Yeah, and I want to just elaborate on what you were just saying, because I think there's a lot of wisdom in there, is that you didn't have an end goal. There was no, how am I going to monetize my relationship with Anthony or his company or with everyone else? It was how, and this is where people totally fuck this up. You came in, how can I bring value to your business?
Right.
And so the end result is, what can I do for you to make you more successful? Yes, I'm going to charge a fee for that, which you deserve. And that's, right. But people come in and go, what can you do for me? And that's where they have it all wrong. Because by you bringing value to the table and saying, look, I'm going to build out this product. We're going to feature your weddings. Your brides are going to want to be on my page. So this is going to be a symbiotic relationship here. It's going to be a win-win-win across the board. You gave value to my company. In return, that was the business play. Instead of looking at it and saying, all right, if Anthony pays me $5 today, I may make a profit today, but I lose him for the rest of his life. Whereas when I don't ask for anything up front, the ask is on the back. You're now able to have someone who will be a loyal customer to your company for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And I think that's a huge difference.
Well, and I think it's like you said, it's all relationship driven. I think that that's the thing that's really interesting about our industry as a whole, is this entire industry is relationship driven. And so many business owners, even with everything that's on offer today, from Instagram to media to platforms to opportunities to connect with different, local potential clients, when you survey the businesses, everyone still tells you that everything's relationship driven. Yes. And so that was essential for us with Carats Cake, is that hearing that over and over and over and over again, I think that there's something to be said there too with our business, is that first and foremost, we look to build relationships.
Of course.
And from there, like you said, it's not so much, and I think that's one of the things that coming, from the other side of the table, coming from, the investment space first and then, landing here as an entrepreneur is, yes, you're always thinking about how you're going to make business, how you're going to make money rather. That's something that you and I talk about. It's one thing to have a business and it's entirely different to actually be making money off of that business. But at the end of the day, I think that what I learned more and more is that you can create something for a market and say, hey, this is what I think you need as an outsider. And candidly, even 7 years in, I still feel like an outsider sometimes, that this is what I think you need. But at the same time, you also have to take the time to listen to your community and hear what they actually need. And I think that very quickly we learned that the more we could listen to you all, who truly are the experts in the industry, the more we could really fundamentally understand what we could build together. And that's really what our journey's been about.
Awesome. Where did you even begin with this, right? So I think for entrepreneurs coming home, we could have a million ideas, right? And I have ideas pop into my head all the time.
Totally.
And then I sit there and I go, well, there's obviously no place in the world for that. I'm like, that's a great concept, just no market for it. So it's an awful idea. Sitting down one day, you're like, all right, I'm going to build a brand called Carats Cake. And
didn't exactly happen like that. So I used to work for a family office VC. So we used to invest in businesses all the time. And I loved investing in entrepreneurs. I love local business owners. It's something that I've always been drawn to my entire life. And I left to go to business school with every intention, truly probably going back to the investment side. When I was sitting in, and this is the nerdiest story, and I've said it over and over again, but I was sitting in a strategy class and they started talking about the wedding industry, and we were doing a case study. It's a famous Harvard case study on De Beers and marketing diamonds and what they did. And it was the first time that I'd ever looked at the wedding industry as a place full of local business owners and not as a place just full of consumers. And that was kind of the first aha moment for me, is that it was interesting to me that sort of everywhere you looked at the time, every single business inside the industry was focused on couples, and servicing the businesses was somewhat of, an afterthought. And that sounds, I don't mean it to sound like they weren't thinking about you, but that wasn't, the initial motivation. And so what was interesting to me initially was that there were all these local businesses inside the space and no one really building a business for them first. And so that was kind of the first thing that really got me excited about the industry. And then I started picking into it and researching. And the thing that was even more interesting for me is that you had 500,000 local entrepreneurs who, were predominantly year after year driving this entire industry. That is truly the backbone of the industry. And so we sat down and said, okay, if we're going to build a business that's truly going to be for the industry first, what does that look like? And so the funny thing about it is then when you start to realize you have to figure out how you can get entrenched with that industry rather quickly. And so for us, it was an opportunity to create the front end of Carats Cake first, which was a way to get to know the business owners and to do something that everybody was familiar with already, because that's, it's really hard to come in and say, hey, we're going to revolutionize everything without truly understanding what you guys are doing and also trying to sell something that nobody understood. So we started with Carats Cake first, and it was probably a couple months in when all of a sudden we hit a number of businesses on the site that far surpassed our goal of where we would be, because we got lucky with a couple great people inside this industry, from you to other incredible photographers in New York City, great people on the West Coast, like, Jose Villa, who I picked up the phone and they had a conversation with me. And again, relationship building, gave us content, which, was incredible, and supported us, early on, that then, got other people to be submitting content, other people to be creating profiles. And so it was probably that, that first year when we had businesses, like the table turned from, when we first started the business in those 6 months, we were chasing everybody. And all of a sudden, 6 months after that, we started getting to this place where we had, 100 new businesses a week joining Carats Cake. And that was that moment.
Was that your tipping point?
That, I don't know if I would call it our tipping point, because the thing that I think is so interesting is you're constantly always tipping. We are at, a huge inflection point right now that we're super excited about. And you're constantly learning as a business owner. And I think that—
Was that the moment where you said, oh, I feel like I'm onto something here? Where, you have that moment where you're like, all right, my idea wasn't viable. Now you have proof of concept at that point.
Yes, we definitely had proof of concept. But I think the one thing that I can tell you as an entrepreneur, I kind of always feel like we have something to prove. So I look back, and even now, I still look at the business and I'm like, we have so much farther to go. Like we're just at the beginning, which is hilarious because you're like, oh, wow, we've been doing this now for almost 6 years. So we're not just at the beginning, but we truly are just at the beginning trying to build something better. And so I think that we're still like we're probably hitting the next tipping point. But yes, the vendor adoption to what we were doing was and probably still is one of the things that I get the most excited about. Those relationships.
And it makes sense because I think what people didn't understand in the marketplace is when you have these massive companies, one thing massive companies can't provide is personalized service. You just can't.
Right.
When you're at that large of a scale, you're a multi-billion-dollar company, it's very hard to have the CEO. You're just not. You're not.
Right.
It's a very different business model, and you came into a point where Instagram had just become really popular. It was taking off 6 years ago, and you hit the market at the right time with the right concept, with the right look, but you also offered something that nobody else was at that point, which was a personalized, individualized service. So I think a lot of times people look at things on a big macro, like, oh, they have these ideas. Like, I need to become the biggest in the world. Where in essence, you don't necessarily need to.
Right.
What you can do is become a micro but have massive impact because you're able to offer something much more individualized and personalized than something on a giant, than a company on a giant scale.
Right. I think you also have to be I think that there's something of, and it's, an interesting thing that's happening inside the investment space right now is that you have to be super aware, to your point, of what those business goals are, right? I have, and we rather, because it's always we have a vision for what our company can be, and we have only just touched a sliver of it. But you have to touch those slivers because one by one, knocking down those slivers is what ultimately gets you to that pie in the sky vision. And I think that that's something that, we are always and we continue to be hyper aware about. And there are definitely moments where I'm like, we are not going fast enough. We should have already have accomplished this. But at the same time, that's our journey as a company. And so it's that concept of always making future forward progress and hitting, what are those goals? And, for us as a company, it became we got lucky for what it's worth and became profitable within our first year of business, where we were then able to fund the business off of our revenue stream, which is not the norm in a lot of ways. And that is something that has been a huge asset to us because it's allowed us to stay nimble and pivot and, react to opportunities that we see inside the market that, like you had talked about, if we were larger, you can't react easier. It's like that analogy of, when you're driving a 2-person bike, it's very easy to, turn right as opposed to when you're driving a semi that has, 12 pylons on the back, you're not just swinging a left real fast. But I think that those, hitting those milestones and making sure, like you said, that it's that concept that yes, big is beautiful, but also you can be small and still create impact along the way.
When you're looking back, right? And if you were giving advice to other people, you talked about pivoting. So I'm a big believer in that because I think sometimes people go, okay, I need to go from A to B. It's going to be a linear process. And they get locked in that and they lose, they literally look straight ahead. They don't look left or right.
Right.
And, I've talked to a bunch of people on the show and they said, as soon as I looked left, I realized, whoa, what I was doing, there was so much more profit on the left.
Right.
But if I didn't make that pivot, this business wouldn't even be here
100%.
5 years later because they're so focused on a singular goal, they're missing everything else along the way.
Yep. I couldn't agree with that more. And I think that that's the biggest thing that you learn kind of along the way is there are moments, as a company, sometimes we talk a lot about the Henry Ford quote of that they would have asked for faster horses instead of cars, right? So as an entrepreneur, there's that, struggle between you have to listen, but you also have to marry that, no pun intended, with also your vision as an entrepreneur and kind of the opportunities that you see. And that's kind of always been, for us with Carats and Cake is that there's opportunity, over here, right, that we see. But then equally, there's also needs from the industry that we have to simultaneously fill, right? And so there are moments where if you don't pick your head up, you can't see those opportunities. And I can tell you that, we as a business have been lucky that at the right inflection points, we've chased those opportunities. And it is why we're standing here today. The business model, and every once in a while I do this exercise for myself personally, is I look back at our initial pitch and the overarching vision has not changed of what we're accomplishing. The day-to-day path that we've taken to get there is not at all what I expected it to be. But we are here because of those inflection points. We're here because we had the opportunity to take a step back and say, all right, where's the revenue? what can we be doing? And that's the thing too as a business is sometimes you have the luxury of being able to chase different things, right? Sometimes you're chasing audience. Sometimes you have to chase revenue. Sometimes you have to chase brand or whatever that is for you. It all really depends. And something for us that, we got lucky with is we started chasing revenue that wasn't always revenue that we thought we would be chasing, but it's been opportunity that's informed us and educated us and is why we're sitting here today.
Give me one opportunity that presented itself where you had to say, all right, I need to pivot and go this way.
So I think the biggest thing for us with Carats and Cake is we, tested a couple of different revenue streams. I was always a big believer on it's great to have audience, but at the same time, if the audience won't pay for what you're selling, it really doesn't matter how big your audience is. That's kind of been something that I've always been hyper aware of. And so we always tested monetization super early to make sure that we kind of understood what people would pay for. And I think that that's the other thing too is just because someone pays what you're selling doesn't mean they're actually buying what you're selling. And so that was something that we really learned. So the first test of monetization, we were selling something. And it was doing great. And then when we started surveying our clients to figure out what they were buying, they weren't actually buying what we were selling them. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? And so that was the first aha moment is we were like, oh, wait a second here. Pretend that we tell them we're selling, A plus B plus C. Really, they're like, no, I'm buying D from you. And you're not even selling D. And that's what we realized is a benefit that we weren't even pitching. So we basically invested heavily in that benefit and push the entire business towards that benefit. And that's truly what made us profitable so fast.
I mean, it's interesting as you say that. I went to a restaurant 4 months ago. Well, that opened 4 months ago, and it started off as a market. And they were selling meat. It was a butcher shop. And he had little stalls in there. One was vegetables and a few cheese and also a coffee shop. So one day a guy comes in and goes, I want you to close the market. I want you to have the chef back there to make lunch for 25 people. 25 people show up, 25 people eat. One of those people turns around and goes, I want you to stay open tomorrow night. I want you to do a private dinner for my company for 20 people in the market.
Right.
Next day they go, and I need you to be open on Friday too because I want to come back again because the food was so good.
Right.
Well, 4 months later, they did 250 covers on Saturday night. And I was talking to the owner and I'm like, what a pivot, man. He's like, I was in the wholesale meat business.
Right.
And now he's running one of the most successful restaurants in Long Branch, New Jersey, and the place is packed, overflowing, and you can't get a reservation, and people are writing it up, and it's really kind of like an outlier in terms of restaurant success. There's no backing, there's nothing. It was a market, which is now a restaurant with 100 seats.
Right.
And at that moment, I was like, dude, I give you so much credit. So many people would have just been like, I'm not opening for dinner. You had 220 people in here. Like, you're bringing in like 30,000 in revenue off one Saturday. And he's like, yeah, most people would have just said no, or this isn't going to happen. You just went for it. And as it evolved, he would take the fruit stand and get rid of it. The cheese stand, get rid of it. And now he's got all these different rooms.
But that's what you have to do.
And I feel like it was but he did it so quick.
Right.
Most people, it goes over 3 years. He did it in 3 months.
Right.
And I said, man, that's such a brilliant business move because he let the business dictate to him back as to how he was going to proceed, not what he wanted it to be. The business said, no, this is what's going on. There's a market. We're showing you there's a market. Just do it.
Right.
And he let that happen. And I'm listening to that and it's just making me think of that story.
Well, because it's what happens when you go from idea to implementation.
Yep.
In the idea stage, you kind of have to be in your own head a little bit and say, this is where I'm going. But then the second you put it out on the market, if you don't listen, and it's not so much even listening sometimes because like that's a much more direct you have to sometimes when you don't have direct access to the consumer right away, you have to figure out how to get that feedback. I could not be more of an advocate for especially the hard stuff. For us, the biggest changes we've made with our business is when we've been given feedback that, listen, might not have been delivered the best way, right? And that's something that
people get feedback not delivered the best way. I can't imagine.
Right. But I think that's one of the biggest things with feedback is learning to separate the tone or the actual words from, again, what somebody's trying to tell you. And it's through that feedback, whether it's the people telling the restaurant owner, hey, I want you to close down, or someone telling you like, hey, this isn't actually valuable to me, or what are you guys doing over here? That if you take the time to listen to that information, that's what in turn allows you to see where the opportunities are. Because some people are lucky, like the restaurant, and someone just says, hey, here's your opportunity. Other times, which has been the case with us, we have to sit there and really carve out those opportunities for feedback and be able to take it as a team and then say, oh, wait, actually, that wasn't nice, but what they mean is this, and wow, that's interesting.
So one thing I definitely wanted to talk to you about is is something we've spoken about in depth the last couple of times we've hung out, which is the changing climate of not just the world, but the wedding industry.
Right.
And I feel, you have a really good grasp on the global picture right now, but more so on the micro level as to how it is going to change. And for those of people listening, watching, what we're talking about is the world is changing at such a fast pace at the current movement. And look at the iPhone in the past 10 years. We have like 10 versions. And if you look at camera 1 to camera 10, it's as good as what we're shooting with. Now you apply that's going to cut across every single industry. From medical to weddings, right?
Right.
And I see it on our end, whether it's a changing consumer,
right?
Whether it's someone who owns a 2 million acre ranch and becomes a vegetarian and has a vegetarian wedding. There's so many things where the consumer is now changing, and people are buying fake diamonds, it's whatever they are, But the speed at which we're changing now, whereas it used to be, innovation was 20 years, we're changing in 20 days.
Right.
And I think there's a naivety right now in the wedding industry that change is not going to impact how we do business, who we do business with, the methods we do business, who we're selling to, how we're selling to them, the speed at which we deliver our products.
Right.
And I think that can be a catch-22 because for someone like us, people want things tomorrow.
Right.
And to manufacture an amazing wedding album, I tell people, is the same as assembling a Ferrari. It takes time. If you want one that's done overnight, you get that on Snapfish for $9.99, and you'll have it within 24 hours in your house and free shipping.
Right.
So, again, minus the luxury level, the consumer's changing, and I think you talk to more vendors across more platforms than anyone else, whether it's from hotels to wedding photographers. So you're probably the best person in the world to comment on what we have going on right now. So A, where do you see it going?
Right.
B, what do you see happening to the vendors themselves? C, how can people get ahead of the curve and be prepared for the massive change that I think is going to happen in the next 5 years?
Right. It's a lot of questions.
There's a lot of questions.
So I don't have a crystal ball. If I did, we'd be sitting somewhere different.
Where would we be if you did that?
I don't know. I think the biggest thing ultimately is at the end of the day is that none of us really knows exactly where it's going to go. So I saw this quote recently that really resonated with me, that we can't really anticipate where things are going to go, but we can control how prepared we are for the unexpected. Mm-hmm. And so what I mean by that is the industry is drastically shifting. I think the thing that is great about weddings and all the data and all the research that we look at is that consumers love an experience right now, and that will continue to matter even for the next generation. Now, the way that they spend on that experience is probably going to be different in a way that, for a very long time, I think things were somewhat regimented in tradition. And I think that the tail end of that is happening, meaning not to be scary, but there will be couples who, might not see the value in a traditional photographer. There might be couples that don't see the value in a traditional wedding, whatever that ceremony relationship means to them. And I think that all we can do as an industry is be aware that change is coming and prepare ourselves. And so whatever that means for you as a business owner, whether it's readjusting the way you spend, it's the way that you invest in your business, because it all comes down to financial viability during moments of change. So that's the other thing that I really love, is that as much as things are going to change, and probably to your point, change more drastically than they have in a long time, our industry lags a lot of other industries. You've seen the fundamental transformation, ultimately I would argue in the last year, really take hold in retail, where if you walk around and see what's happening with bricks and mortar, and you see, what's happening inside New York City right now with a couple major retailers.
Yeah, of course. I mean, what Saks is, who just closed today?
Well, Barney's
sorry. Is in the way
and I think that, so every industry is changing, and there's a lot of reasons that industries are changing. But what happens with change is also there's huge opportunity. And the people that are able to take advantage of opportunity are going to be the people that really do three things, one of which we were talking about a moment ago, and that is really picking their heads up and kind of seeing where the opportunities arise, because there are going to be a lot of opportunities. The second thing is having the resources to take advantage of those opportunities. So people look at, huge moguls inside industries. And the people that rise up during huge transformations of change are the people that have the resources to invest, people that are able to buy real estate when the market's downturned, people that are able to build out, companies that meet new needs as industries evolve, So I think as a business owner, really thinking about, I don't want to say conserving capital, but making sure that you have enough capital to ride the change is going to be really essential. And I think that comes into the third thing is spending and investing differently. Something that I've always admired about you as a business owner is you kind of always evolve to where we're going, and recognizing that the way that we used to run companies, with a ton of fluff, if you will, or other expenditures that if you really take a step back and recognize aren't actually essential right now. I think that, looking inward and reorganizing the way that you think about how you do business is also so essential right now. And then to answer your big question about, what that actually means, again, I'm not entirely sure. It's just that we see things really starting to shift in other industries. And as much as we will always be an industry that's rooted in offline experiences, I think that that's something that's really special for us. You're not going to be able to have a wedding online the same way that you can have a wedding offline, at least probably in our lifetime. Who knows what's going to happen, in another life. But right now, I still think that people want to have those, offline experiences. And I think that that's really important. But I think that, the way people shift and spend is going to really influence our industry a lot.
So let me throw some things at you.
Yep.
You fire back with what you think, right?
Yep.
So number one, to what you said, thank you for your compliment. I think ego gets in the way of a lot of people. For me, we downsize studios. To have a bigger studio is all ego-based, right? How much square footage do I need to operate my business?
And I didn't want to, say
no, but that's
because people traditionally think that downsizing means something bad, but it's
not.
Smart business practice.
It's taking a smaller footprint. This is, and people think that it's funny. Somebody said to me, "Are you having financial problems?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, "I'm spending less money," and they go, "Oh," and I'm like, "That's called giving a raise to the business." That doesn't necessarily. It is all that is everything else about that is ego.
Right.
And public perception and all those things.
Right.
Having a smaller office does not mean your business is not doing as well. What it means is you're having a smaller footprint. The business is operating in the same way. I still have the same people who work here.
Better margins.
And I have better margins. And you extrapolate that over the 10 years, let's say.
Right.
If I can save $30,000 a year over 10 years, it's $300,000 when you compound that interest. It starts to become, you know this. I don't have to tell you this, right? There's massive upside to downsizing a business. So number one, I would say put your ego aside. If you're owning a business right now, I know you're going to agree with that because that's, you just have to put your ego aside. You can have a bigger space, but that only feeds your ego. But to your other point was, where do you think the opportunity is going to be? So let's go throw out a few vendors here. Florists, where do you feel that their opportunity is going to be to capitalize on a changing market?
I think what's going to happen for any business that specializes in tangible goods inside this industry is that they're going to be able to spend smarter. And so what I mean by that is we are at the precipice of the entire data information phase. And so what that means is from a floral perspective, I think that you're going to see opportunities for business owners to buy smarter in a way that you might have, entire industries that grow out of, the floral space that are all data-driven in the way they produce flowers, which then might mean that there's opportunity for florists to really look at their spend and, what drives, their ROI. And so what I mean by that is, and I forget who it was, but I was talking to this florist recently that, there's going to be opportunities where, you'll be able to invest in creating, and I know that this is a challenge with, an art form, but, invest in creating floral works of art that might cost you less, right? But that you're still able to command a similar price point for. I think that there's going to be opportunity there. I also think that as the way that the solopreneur becomes, really a mature opportunity inside many industries, that there's going to be opportunities to work smarter with other, labor sources that might make those opportunities. I think that that's going to be, really interesting for florists. And I also think that going back to when we talked to, you're still going to need, I think that that's also, it just depends. Like there's no right answer across the industries because, if you are someone that, does production, all the time. You're going to need different resources than someone that doesn't have to create production all the time and isn't servicing 20 different properties in New York City, as well as to 20 events a, week on the weekend, and, 6 other corporate events and florals for 12 different offices. That's an entirely different business model. But I think that there's going to be, some opportunities there, and the way that really what it's going to be is kind of what's happened, I think, in the food space, and what's happened in a couple other places is in retail is hopefully you're going to be able to use data to make smarter purchase decisions and reduce waste.
And what do you think? I think this is like the lowest hanging fruit of them all. Right now, no secret, wedding photography is the most oversaturated of, I feel, all the vendors.
Okay.
You may disagree with me.
I don't know that I have data to agree or disagree on that.
But I will throw it out there. I will say that my category of vendors in the industry is the most oversaturated because it's the lowest point of entry. Whereas to become a florist, you need trucks, and you have to actually. There's a whole different science to that. Where if you're a caterer, you need massive. Just even if you're operating out of a single space to produce the event. There's or if you.
And I think that's where the opportunity is with those businesses is that the shared economy will allow for an opportunity to reorganize costs that'll hopefully allow for different cost structures inside those two. Especially
for now, for people getting in the wedding industry, they ask me, "I want to be a wedding photographer." I'm like, find another career at this point because. I think we've had so many. There's so many hundreds, if not thousands, of people doing 10 weddings a year. So what happens then? In our economy, there's a finite number of weddings a year. Let's call it 10,000. 10 years ago, you had 50 photography studios. Those 50 photography studios have splintered off. You now have 300 photographers out of those studios, plus 700 people who've decided to join the industry. So you have more now than great. But the weddings have not multiplied 10 times. You still have the same number of weddings, plus or minus a few, from 10 years ago. So now what happens is the supply and demand gets all screwed up. Is the demand stays static, but the supply now is overflowing.
Right.
I understand at the higher end where we are, it's a little less disruptive because the amount of work it takes to get to shooting higher end weddings. You can't just show up and do that. But for people listening who are in the middle market that want to make a career out of this for the next 5 years, what advice would you give to them? How can they differentiate themselves? You look at more content from a photo standpoint than most people do. So you're able to see, hey, I'm seeing this and I know this is obviously working and it's successful, and I'm seeing this and it's not.
Right. So I think the first thing, this is similar to my answer a second ago, is don't spend any money that you don't have to. I think that, going back to what you said, for whatever reason that people spend, I think one of the things that's, again, depending on your business, but for anyone that's entering inside the photography space, is beyond investing in your education as a photographer, don't invest in other fluff, right? Because the beauty of being a entrepreneur inside an industry where you don't need bricks and mortar, you're not a florist, there's not a high cost of goods sold. Yes, there's cost of, film development and equipment and things like that, but minimize any fixed costs that you have is the first thing I would say, because then if you can look at your fee becomes more profit. The more fixed costs you have, fixed costs being a lease or whatever it would be inside your prospective space, means that your profit margin is greatly diminished. And so the less upfront cost investment you have means the more profit you make. I think the second thing that I would say is really truly think about where your consumer is. And so this is something that we talk about all the time as a business. And at the end of the day, I'm not saying that you should only invest in Instagram, because you have to figure out, again, where your market is for where your potential clients are. And I know it sounds super funny coming from a platform-based company to say don't invest with us. But at the end of the day, the consumer is on Instagram right now.
Yes.
And more and more and more, if you can invest where your consumer is. I talk to new business owners, and again, Instagram has become the new website. It's your new calling card. It's your new portfolio. And the beauty of that is there's not upfront cost. There's not creating a brand. There's not investment in creating a logo. There's not. And that's part of, what I'm a big believer in. And there are bad cases of this, but the good cases are, before you start a business, try to test the business. And so what I mean by that is, you want to open a photography business, or you're getting started in this business, don't worry about a website or business cards. Worry about building out your work first and shooting it and seeing if enough people will pay you for what you're doing before you build a website, before you invest in a brand, before you do all of this. Because ultimately, the business will drive itself. And if the business drives itself, then you can make those other investments along the way. But I think a lot of people sit there and they're like, okay, I'm going to start out on my own and I need to, do all this collateral or make all these investments before I actually see if I have a real business.
Yes.
And I think that my advice today would be see if you have a business first before you do anything else.
And I agree with that. I think, the other thing you brought up is you have to really manage costs. And people, I think to this day, don't have an understanding of what they're running at. And, for example, I'll talk to somebody and they'll be like, oh, I charge $5,000. I'm like, I don't care what you charge. What'd you make? Right. So let's back that now. Your car lease was $500. Your rent was $3,000. Your insurance, your staff. What'd you make? And then when you actually sit down and run those numbers, and I've helped some people in the wedding industry with this, and I'm like, it cost you $5,600 to go to work. You charge $5,000. You lost $600 on Saturday.
100%.
You're turning money. It's Ponzi. I always call that. It's like the worst Ponzi scheme in the world. But you're not actually profitable because you don't know what you're spending. And then I'll look at them and I'll go, okay, you're leasing a $600 a month car. Okay, it has 4 wheels. Okay, I understand it's really nice. It's got to go. And they're like, whoa, wait. I'm like, no. Like, you need a $200 Jeep lease, like bare minimum. It gets you to the same location. And then they look at me and like, who are you to say that? I'm like, my Mazda has 115,000 miles. People think I'm cheap. I call it frugal.
Right.
I drive it to work. It gets beat up. I don't need a Range Rover. It's not a matter of affording it. It's just that's an extra $500 a month that goes out to the same thing with 4 wheels that's going to get destroyed with rips in the seats from all the camera gear. And they're like, oh. And I'm like, but if you want to be profitable, the only way to do that is to manage what you're spending on a daily basis. And like you said, variable costs. If you don't need a car, rent a car when you need one. That way you're only paying for it on an on-need basis.
100%.
You don't need a big studio. Maybe go to a WeWork space where you're only paying for the conference room on the day you need it. Instead of having a fixed cost of a showroom in New York City at $5,000 a month, you never recuperate. Only pay for what you need when you need it. If you can live by that, I think no matter what field you're in, you can run a much more successful business.
100% agree.
And there's so many companies in the world that aren't profitable. And, we can go on and on and on is because they have these massive overheads. If they just cut some of that overhead, all of a sudden that becomes profit.
Well, and I think especially from a small business owner perspective, that's what is most exciting for where we are as far as an industry right now is there are so many more people paying attention to supporting business owners that are armies of 1 and armies of 2 and armies of 3, and not even just inside our industry, but there's so many resources that can help you build a stronger business today that when you started a business probably didn't exist, whether it's
none of that,
whether it's creating an LLC online, whether it's, and that's my other advice for a small business owner, make sure you structure your business so that you are taking advantage of opportunities taxation wise. If you want to build an LLC, you can write off things differently. I'm not an expert here, so please, talk to somebody who is, but it's those are the things that you want to invest in. And the part of that too also is not being short-sighted. And that's something else that I think all of us as business owners are going to have to be very careful with. Like you said, one of the things I love most about what I do for a living is I spend time still every week talking to at least 5 to 10 local business owners. And it's funny because I get on the phone with people and they're like, you're talking, we're having a conversation now. And that is how I stay close to what we're doing as a business, is I really think that as long as, you understand what the industry is doing and you stay current with local business owners, the stronger it makes us as a company. And so it's something that I really prioritize my time for. But I think that one of the big issues that we're all going to have is as industries change, I hear from a lot of business owners right now inside our space that it's not a great year or it's a weird time or whatever words we want to use to describe that. The other big challenge then is to not be short-sighted, right? Because there's going to be moments where, you might need to make a buck in a way that you didn't need to make a buck a decade ago, right? And I think as long as we are aware as business owners inside a space that has a 14 to 18-month lead time, every decision we make today will impact us for 24 months to come. And so making sure that you're strategic about those decisions and really understanding what those opportunities are. It's the same way that I talk about with a business owner. I remember when we started Carats Cake, it was like, oh, wow, we have to pay a lawyer X amount of dollars, when we were coming up with just the idea before, we had investors or anything. And we, forked out the money to set the corporation up the right way to make sure that, we were essentially set up for success. And so it's making sure that, while you want to stay away from superfluous costs, you want to make sure that you are investing in things that will actually build for tomorrow and aren't just for today.
And then the last category, which is someone, I've had a lot of venues in our area kind of, privately say, hey, this is going on right now. Our numbers are down, right? And I think it's two-part. I think 2019 across the board was just a weird year in New York City. But I think to the latter of that is, again, supply and demand. There's more venues now, and we have a lot of bigger venues opening up and competing against one another. If you're a venue in the space, how do you stand apart from other venues, right? So what are you seeing that a venue's doing that's really successful, or someone you work with, doesn't have to be in New York, but they've done
besides using our software.
Besides using your software, hint, hint. But where have you seen people step differently, where they're pivoting and saying, "Hey, I'm offering," because really at a venue, what's the experience that they can offer that's different, and what have you seen that someone's done where they've really set themselves apart from that?
So again, I think the one big thing that we see with venues, especially at the corporate level, is that sometimes there's a challenge of how they present themselves digitally. And the one thing that I will say over
the horrible websites that so many of them
again, they should use our software. But I think that's one of the big things that at the end of the day, we talk about all the time is in this industry being relationship driven.
Yes.
When you start to survey couples get married for the most part, especially when you're talking to the elevated venues inside the space. They get married somewhere because they have an emotional attachment to it or there is a reason. So for example, it's one of my favorite lines, and our director of partnerships on the property side always says this, is that if you don't know, let's pretend, if you don't know the St. Regis, New York, you're probably not a client that's going to get married to the St. Regis, New York. Like if you're not familiar with the brand, it might not be a brand that you're going to choose your wedding for. And so instead what that means is properties, most of the clients that are going to get married at your venue are already familiar with you. They've either had drinks, again, pretend we're talking about the St. Regis, New York at the King Cole Bar, or they've, seen an event there. You're already in their decision set. And so it's a matter of engaging with that audience and converting them and figuring out how to be strategic. It's not necessarily about reaching new eyeballs as much as it is about sprinkling your existing clientele with, those little ideas of what your capabilities are inside the wedding space. I think that that's huge, is that, again, I think it's to quote our director of property, it's an old hospitality saying that like your new client is already sitting and having drinks in your bar downstairs type of deal. That's where they are. So I think that, relaying that into weddings. And so making sure that, any opportunity that you have to engage with existing clientele in a non-confrontational way from a weddings perspective is interesting. I think the second thing is more and more and more, and there's young companies that are starting to do this, we are dabbling in it, is the way that you can experience a property from a virtual perspective is going to become more and more important in the next couple of years. I think that a lot of couples are going to expect to be able to, tour a property as if they were walking into that property online, because that is what our expectation has become as consumers in retail. And I think that retail will translate into, what we do, meaning that you can essentially try clothing on digitally right now without stepping foot in a store. And so I think the same thing's going to start to happen for properties, where it's not just going to be about pretty wedding images and seeing that done, but couples, are going to want to be able to experience the property without actually going there. And so I think figuring out how to invest in those resources is going to be important.
I love it. And to expand on that a little bit, is it those people are going to need to start investing and investing smartly in creating content for their venues. And a lot of that cannot be shot the day of an event.
100%.
They're going to need to bring in real film crews and shoot production quality content to give people that experiential. When you open the doors, you have that feeling of walking into a Cipriani's where you see this expansive ceilings.
Right.
You can now translate that over to a digital product.
And that's the other thing too that we see over and over again is, like you just touched on, and I think that's a little bit of the consumer shift these days, and we see it, with data on social, is that couples really want to be able to envision themselves there. They don't want to necessarily see someone else's wedding. They do, like, a real wedding is more important to them than a styled shoot, but you have to be careful about just thinking that straight real wedding collateral is what's going to drive your business, because then it also doesn't give someone the opportunity to really discover the space for themselves, if that makes sense.
Like the blank space,
yeah. And so it's that, combination of the two. But I think that, other properties that we see doing really interesting things is you have to sell to your strengths. I think that that's the big thing, is at the end of the day, just like you do as a photographer, yes, there's a lot of business owners inside this industry across the board. At the end of the day, at a certain level of spend, someone is hiring you because they like you,
Yes.
Anthony. That's why they're hiring you, right? Because there are, for most consumers, they can hire a couple different photographers. The price point is not once they're inside a certain level or a certain echelon. It's about how well they connected with you personally and whatever those touch points are, right? And the same thing starts to happen with properties where the ones that, really play to their strengths, are you a property that has a super foodie following, then sell that. But if you are a property that doesn't, don't try to compete on that level. Don't sell that you have this great chef because
you are. Know who you are.
And play to those strengths.
No. So I want to be respectful of your time. I know you have kid and dog, and but one question I want to leave you, I want you to share with, right? You've had this amazing journey of 7 years and a few years before that doing VC work. If you could give yourself one piece of advice that would change your life from 10 years ago to this point, what would that be?
Probably what I tell myself today, learn to listen to the hard stuff better. As it really comes back to feedback. I wrote a newsletter about this a couple weeks ago, but I really think that the longer I've been on this journey, the better I've gotten at really being able to take it and not take it and then, turn that and interpret that into something that moves me forward. Whereas I can tell you a decade ago, my old boss in VC once told me I was the worst employee he ever had and I was totally unemployable. And I remember I was wrecked for a couple weeks at the time. I was like, wow, he says I'm his worst employee ever. And what he actually meant is that I needed to go build my own company and do my own thing, right?
I mean, he may just have phrased it a little off.
Right, but I think that's the thing, is that, if I could tell my old self, it's, stop taking everything so impersonally in that regard, and instead look at what everybody is telling you and figure out how to extrapolate that information into progress. And I think that that's what it's all about. And, 10 years ago, everything, and still we still do. We have good days and bad days. Somebody says something to you and you take it too personally. Sure. But now I would say, more often than not, I'm able to really listen to what someone else is trying to say to me and not take it personally, but instead, pick it apart and say, okay, what can I actually learn from this? And that I think, as a 20-something-year-old, 24, I was really not that great at that. In fact, I think I was much more of a fighter. 24-year-olds at all. Much more of a fighter than a listener at that phase of my life. So that probably would have, gotten me a little bit farther. But I also really am one of those people that, I can openly tell you we wouldn't be sitting here today without the, mistakes that I've made along the way. And I think that that's the key is those mistakes are ultimately, if you take the time to learn from them, that's what makes you stronger, And again, a decade ago, I wasn't that good at it. Yeah, now I've gotten better. I'm going to
double down on your sentiment is you are the sum of all the mistakes you've made, not the successes you've had. Because
100%.
It's amazing how great you can feel, and the success doesn't teach you anything, in my opinion. It's the mistakes. I think the other thing too is just as a business owner, mistakes allow you to really also, from a people filter standpoint, we're not perfect. We're all created imperfectly. And when you're able to be surrounded by people and you make a mistake, they make you better because of that mistake. Whereas when you have a team that doesn't surround you and you make a mistake, they make that mistake the death of you. Whereas a mistake doesn't define who the person is. I feel what defines who the person is how they handle that mistake and respond to it. And as a business owner, mistakes are blessings because they allow you the opportunity to learn and grow. Whereas successes are just people telling you how fucking great you are. And at a certain point, that's nice, but it really does nothing in terms of growing. And it's like the kid who has the $1 billion trust fund. He's never had adversity his whole life, and then all of a sudden something happens and it crushes him. I'll take the person who has had adversity their whole life, who's overcome that adversity, persevered through it, and then become an amazing human being because of it. Those are the people you want on a team. Those are the people you want in a business, and those are the people you want to be accountable to.
I agree.
So I want to thank you because you're awesome.
Thanks for having me.
I love what you do.
Feelings mutual.
No, I love what you do, and I love what you've built, and I love that you've stayed true. I love that you haven't sold out. I love that you haven't commoditized things you could have because you've looked long term. And at every point you've questioned, in my opinion, knowing you for now 6 years, you never took the dollar up front and sold yourself short on the back end. So you sold today for tomorrow, and I appreciate that greatly because so many other people would have cashed out, sold themselves short, just like we were talking about before. Hey, you can commoditize this. You could, but that's sells your brand short in the long run, and you haven't done that. You stayed true to it. One day, I firmly believe it'll be immensely successful. You will sell this for a lot of money, and you'll remember us. And I will hopefully be watching the sunset at your house at the Hamptons when you retire there. All those things. So, but you're just an awesome person to know, and I appreciate our relationship. I appreciate our conversations, and I appreciate everything you do. And I think everyone really should, because all too often we just don't think about those things. And you support all of us in a way that no one else, in my opinion, ever has in this industry. And you continue to do that even with the amount of success your brand has seen. So I just want to say thank you. And if you could tell everyone where they can find you if they are not advertising with you, I can tell you firmly, they support their advertisers. I'm one for 7 years, and I don't even know what I pay you at this point. Hopefully it hasn't gone up, because I haven't looked at a contract in 7 years. But please tell them where they can find you and all that.
Caratsandcake.com. You can follow us on Instagram, Carats and Cake, and
best way to connect to advertise.
You can email Casey, Kasey, at caratsandcake.com. And we are, like Anthony said, a relationship-driven business. So we don't support traditional advertising. We, strategically work with everyone that does invest in our services, because we really view it as a partnership. But if you're interested in exploring what we do, we'd love to hear from you.
Cool. Well, thank you again, and we'll let you go. Awesome. Thanks, sis.